Hello, everyone, and welcome back to the channel. Thanks for joining us. Today, I'm in my studio because I have a very special guest that I've been itching to talk to for some time. We have Richard Tice, the leader of Reform UK Party, and he's live with me here. Well, I say live, this is all pre-recorded. Hello, Richard.
Richard, great to be with you. Thanks for having me on. And hello, everybody that's listening and watching.
It's so nice that you're talking to a YouTuber. I mean, we've seen you on the television and places like that. It's absolutely fantastic. There's so much to talk about, so I don't want to waste your time. Looking at your manifesto and hearing you on Talk TV, you talk very much about broken Britain and all of that. And I just want to sort of go through what I think, a little preview of where we are in the country or what's happening in the world and everything else. So we have a Prime Minister that nobody voted for. We have a Chancellor that seems to have slipped in through the back door. We seem to be invaded at the borders by all sorts of people who were never invited. We're taxed to the hilt. We have a cost of living crisis. We have extremely expensive energy and people are freezing and worrying whether to heat or eat. Everybody seems to be on strike and nobody seems to apparently want to work anymore. Our buildings are being built on farmland left, right and centre, which seems to be a strange place to build when we need food. There's a woke culture. Our history is being rewritten and children are being educated in a very strange way. People are worried about the 5G that's going to be rolled out and the radiation possibilities from that. Is that for monitoring or surveillance? We have 15-minute cities being tested, which of course is worrying people about how much they can travel in a year. Digital IDs are being looked at. We have a consultation that's going on at the moment. The health of the nation is being totally ignored by government. Andrew Bridgen stood up to tumbleweed, as we saw. Doctors are talking out, and yet the government won't even mention this, which is very strange. Central bank digital currency is slightly concerning because we're going to be gauged on our carbon footprint and whether then we can borrow money. The net zero nonsense is a means of closing down lots of industry and business, it seems to me. And finally, Richard, we have elites in Davos. It's good to see you're not there. Planning more misery for us in the forthcoming months and years. So, Richard Tice, are you the shining knight in white armour? The white knight in shining armour on a white charger. That's it.
Well, look, we're certainly doing our best and we're making progress. There's another key thing. I mean, there's a crisis of crisis, and you've just read out a list almost as long as your arm, Richard.
I know. I'm sorry about that.
I can add to that. There is actually another key thing that I've been talking about that no one else has been talking about in politics, which is the benefits crisis.
Right.
We've got 5.2 million people on out of work benefits. That's 1 in 8 of the working population. In some of our big cities, Richard, it's 1 in 5. And so we can touch on that as well, because it's a tragedy at every single level. And you've got politicians and business leaders wanting to import cheap, low-skilled labour from overseas and just abandon these people who are trapped on benefits. It's an absolute scandal that, as I say, no one dares talk about. So look, all of those things are big, massive issues. I've got common sense answers pretty much to most of them. Maybe the odd one I'm a bit, we're still working on, but I've got pretty strong views on most of them, Richard.
Well, it's so good to hear when we see you. You're talking common sense. You're talking about practical problems, and you're coming up with a plan, which makes sense. Now, some people may say, "Oh, part of that we don't agree with, like things like fracking and what have you." But you're addressing them and you're putting forward an alternative. And when you look at the opposition, that they're not really opposing anything. They're just going further than what the Tories are doing, which is, it leaves people bereft of somewhere to look.
The thing is in life, and I come from the world of business, and I led some big businesses in my time, when people came to me with a problem, I always said, we'll always come up with your proposed recommended solution. Don't just bring me a problem. What do you recommend?
Yes.
And look, whenever I see these problems, I put forward our solution. So we have actually, since last summer, we've been talking about. I then said we've got an economic crisis. I put forward our clear solutions to that. Big, bold, radical stuff. And sure, people might say, well, that works, that doesn't work. But at least we've got a clear plan. I talked about an emergency energy plan back in August, way before anybody else had come up with any energy solutions. That put the cost on the producers, not the taxpayer. And it was a proper plan. And in the beginning of December, I came up with, I think we've got a genuine healthcare emergency in this country, which is absolutely shocking. And at the beginning of December, I put forward a big, bold, radical healthcare plan and how to pay for it. And that was actually because we all hear about the NHS, for example, that there's a staffing crisis. Well, my plan to both retain existing staff and to bring back recently departed staff on that was to say, well, look, for 3 years, if money's the issue and staffing's the issue, tell you what, we'll have zero basic rate income tax for all frontline, patient-facing staff in the NHS and in social care. And guess what? All of a sudden, your staffing problem would disappear very rapidly because for an average nurse, that's about a 15% increase in their take-home pay.
Yes, they wouldn't need to go on
that would
strike.
Be radical.
They don't need to go.
And I said how to pay for it. Look, the rough cost of that, and then I would to get down to zero waiting lists, which is our big bold ambition. I'm the only politician who's ever come up with an ambitious plan to have zero waiting lists. That most
how are you going to do that? Because we've got the ambulances sitting there, and everyone's saying it's impossible. We've got this huge amount of people.
Do you remember the last time we had very little concerns about waiting lists? It was in the early noughties, and it was when Tony Blair's government was using the private healthcare capacity very significantly. And the bottom line is that we should be, the NHS is, look, we're good at funding things. The government's good at funding things. It's very bad at managing things. So what should happen is that basically, and this has been our healthcare plan, you need to put the patient in charge, not the bureaucratic blob. Yes. If you say to patients, look, if you can't see a GP in 3 days, you get a voucher, you go private. If you can't see a consultant in 3 weeks, you get a voucher, you go private. If you can't get an operation in 9 weeks, you get a voucher, you go private. All of a sudden, the patient's in charge. We polled it, Richard. 81% of people don't care where the treatment is done or who does it. They just want the pain gone, preferably tomorrow.
Yes.
So we need to use the private capacity. We costed that. We costed the healthcare thing. Look on my website for the detail of it. You pay for all of that by the Bank of England currently, with all the quantitative easing debt that it printed on its home computer in the City of London. It's paying interest on this 850 billion of quantitative easing to rich city institutions, which it doesn't need to do. And this interest is like 20 to 30 billion quid a year. Other central banks are not doing this. We shouldn't be doing it. Economists agree with me. A former deputy governor of the Bank of England agrees with me. And yet Andrew Bailey, the governor, and the chancellor, they want to carry on with this nonsense. So look, there's solutions to all these challenges.
But why? Well, you see, you come up with these wonderful and very common sense policies, as you say. Why are they not listening? Why is everyone stuck in the mud or just saying, no, it's impossible, we can't do it?
That's the Whitehall Westminster way. It has been for so long. And eventually it's coming unstuck, badly unstuck. And the net result is that Britain isn't working. Britain is broken in all the ways that you described at the beginning.
But you sort of get the impression, and I know this from my listeners, that a lot of this is done on purpose to break Britain. I mean, the net zero thing, the electric cars, and trying to get businesses. Anybody who looks at it seriously can see that it can't possibly work. If you had the transition over a far, far longer period and more technology comes in that would, and you were actually investing in nuclear, yes, we could do it. But the rush to try and get in what seems to be the current sexy whatever.
Yeah, look, I maybe I'm a bit optimistic. I don't think they're deliberately setting out to break Britain, but the unintended consequences of their virtue signalling ignorance is that is what is happening. And net zero is a big thing that we're very strong on. And look, we all want to reduce emissions and we all want cleaner air and we all want to do our bit, of course. And look, I've got an electric car. It's a great piece of technology, but I'm very lucky. I'm I'm in a position I can afford to have one. And I'm putting solar panels on the roofs of my industrial buildings to offer cheaper electricity to my occupiers. So look, there's sensible things one can do, but the whole net zero project, my issue with it is that Westminster's net zero is making us, it's the wrong bit, the wrong price, and the wrong time frame, and it's making everybody poorer and colder. And what happens to colder, older people? Sadly, they die early. So it's actually a net killer. And that's why I say Westminster's net zero is net stupid. Yes, let's invest in all the different technologies, and there's a bunch of them. You don't know which ones are going to come forward at which speed, but you can invest in them. There's a big thing nobody's really talking enough about, for example, which is carbon capture. That may be a really interesting solution. But, I say to people, I've been talking about the energy treasure under our feet.
Yes.
The oil, the gas, the coal, the shale gas, the lithium. Who knew we've got loads of lithium in the UK? We've got all this stuff. We've got literally trillions and trillions of pounds worth. And the analogy I give, Richard, is if you inherited a nice house from a recently departed aunt, and the last thing she said to you is, oh, by the way, there's a pile of treasure under the floorboards equal to about the value of the mortgage of the house. I couldn't be bothered to dig up the floorboards. I'm pretty sure the first thing you do is you get a screwdriver, you lift up the floorboards, you dig out the treasure, you pay off the mortgage, and then you cleanly and neatly put the floorboards back down again. And that's the analogy of what we're talking about. And I think it's an absolute negligent disgrace that Westminster is refusing to use our own energy treasure. I mean, just a couple of mad snippets. All this gas that we're importing in these big ships with these sort of golf ball-like domes, with this liquefied natural gas, whether it's coming from Qatar or the US, that creates 3 or 4 times more CO2 than if we used our own gas. And the gas that's coming from America, guess what? It's shale gas. You couldn't make this stuff up. We've got our own shale gas. We're not using it. Take coal, for example. We're importing 5 million tons of coal from around the world. We've got a century worth of coal in the UK. Here's a stat for your listeners and viewers, Richard.
Yes.
Just guess how much coal was burnt in 2022. I'll give you just a little teaser.
Okay.
The UK, we imported 5 million tons of coal, 5 million tons,
right,
which we burned. Not very much, a fraction of what we used to. You think, okay, that's progress. Around the world, 8 billion tons of coal was burnt last year. A record. Never before has so much coal been burnt. So whatever we're doing, it is virtue signaling nonsense. It'll make zero difference. All it's doing is impoverishing our nation. It's sending our jobs and our money overseas. And the only zero will be the amount of cash in our children, our grandchildren's bank accounts. And I feel very, very strongly about this.
That's what people are worried about.
Yeah, and I tell you, Richard, we will be the only party at the next election. We stand everywhere, 630 seats in England, Scotland, Wales. We'll be the only party telling the truth about the cost of Westminster's net zero, the implications of it, and I think we'll get a lot of traction.
So what's your forecast then? What's the best that we can expect at the next election from reform?
Well, look, what I can promise is that we stand everywhere.
Yes.
630 seats. I can tell you that I've already got over 700 applicants. So we will get there. And of course, look, if you assume the election's back end of next year, people's circumstances change. Some, for whatever reason, won't be able to do it. But we stand everywhere. That I can guarantee. I can guarantee no deals with anybody like the Tories. And people say, oh, you're just going to let Labour in. Look, forget it. The Tories, they're con socialists.
Yes.
The Labour Party are red socialists. So the main two parties, you've got different types of socialism. What we stand for is not left, it's not right. It's common sense, practical solutions to the challenges of the day. And who knows where the polls get to, Richard? Look, we've got some momentum, we're making progress. We all know, of course, it's difficult. It's really difficult. First past the post, weighted vote and all that. But this is a medium-term game. We've got to get proportional representation in the UK. And so many people say, we've got to have something different. Well, that's what we represent.
Absolutely. And I do think a lot of people see that there is definitely something different in what you're offering, because we've just got the same continual, what seems to be, pressure down on people and absolutely no nonsense. And so what strategies do you think that the Tories and the Labour are going to start to roll out rather, towards the election? Because you know what it's like. They'll start dishing out the sweeties and try and make out that we've forgotten all the sleaze, all the parties, all the nonsense that has happened to us, so that they can then win again.
Yeah, look, I think generally elections are fought on one or two key issues.
Yeah.
And there are currently, I think, four big issues as we sit here today, of which I think two will be the epicenter of the next election. So the four big issues is basically the cost of living, i.e. people's net wages, the highest taxes ever. Well, we've got a plan to take 6 million people out of paying any income tax. You lift the threshold from 12.5 grand to 20 grand. We show how to pay for it. The second thing, obviously, is healthcare. We've got a plan how you get to net zero waiting lists. And zero waiting lists would be fantastic. It's achievable within 2 years.
Right.
And then the third thing is energy costs and the whole net zero stuff we've been talking about. And the fourth thing is what basically most people now say is the boats. We've got to stop the boats. We've got a clear, big, bold, radical 6-point plan, how you stop the boats. It's on our website. But fundamentally, you've got to declare a national security threat, which you can do under Article 50, UN 51. You've got to leave the ECHR. You've got to make it clear that 0 people get resettled. You've got to create a whole new Department of Immigration staffed by believers. You've got to have offshore processing centres. And sixthly, and crucially, last but not least, you've got to pick up and safely take back to France. That's the model of that is based on the successes they saw in Australia.
Yes.
It works. But here's the thing, Richard, it requires political will, political courage, political leadership, none of which you've got in the main two parties.
No, absolutely. But I guess all of this predicates the fact that you are now the government. And if that doesn't happen, let's just pretend that that's not likely to happen, that everybody has decided, we won't vote for it.
You're so negative,
I can't imagine
Richard. I'm
that.
an optimist.
Yes, no, I agree with you. And I think you have a very strong chance of really turning things round. I really do. But let's say that you get, I don't know, let's be imaginative and say you have 30 or 40 seats in Parliament next year, whatever it is. What can you do once you're in there? What can we expect?
The first thing is actually, what will happen before the election is that the more traction we get,
yes,
the more that the main two parties will try to nick some of our policies.
Yes.
In order to try and
that's what I was worried about.
Yeah, and look, in a sense, there's no greater sign of flattery than that. And then it's for the electorate to say, well, actually, who's going to deliver? Who can I trust to actually do this stuff and not just waffle on and give us the warm words that we've heard from Tories for the last 12 or 13 years? And I don't think people will trust the Tories. Whether or not people trust Keir Starmer, given the number of U-turns he's done since his leadership campaign, who knows? There's a lot of water to pass under the bridge. What I do know is, yes, first past the post is difficult. But, as my uncle said to me, you've got to be in the room to be in the deal.
Yes.
And by standing everywhere, we give everybody a chance to look at us, to see who we are. And yeah, some people will like it, some people won't. That's democracy. We give it our all and we'll see where we get to. And the more people who vote for us, the more chance we've got of getting seats. And if we can get seats, then we can shape and influence. That's what it's all about.
Yes. And that's what we hope. I want to ask you a question that I don't know that other people will be asking you, but I get it a lot from my viewers. How much influence does the WEF and the World Health Organization hold over our government and our parliament? And if you were in the government, could you sever? I know that the nations have signed up to various things which make it very difficult, but it seems that they're controlling our lives in more ways than almost our government. And people say to me, Rishi Sunak and all the rest are just puppets the strings are being pulled. And I know that a lot of people believe this and they're fearful of what will happen. What would Richard Tice do?
The answer is it's hard to know about some of this influence. Some of it's sort of it's unconscious. as opposed to direct. What I absolutely commit to is that I would never go to Davos. I'd have nothing to do with the World Economic Forum. Look, people are entitled to talk. You can't stop that.
No.
But it's an unelected, unaccountable body with some, I think, some pretty hugely undesirable ambitions. And I think, frankly, the UK should be nowhere near it. Interesting, isn't it, that it's Keir Starmer this week who seems to be going to Davos, not the Prime Minister, apparently. So, yeah, I've got no time for that whatsoever. The World Health Organization is clearly in the hock and directly, very closely linked to China, and some real concerns about that. And we need to be absolutely clear. The Chinese communist regime does not have anybody else's interests at heart except their own. And I think we've got to be incredibly alert to the risks of the influence of China. Their Belt and Road Initiative is extending right into huge parts of our lives. I'm going to be talking about that significantly in the coming weeks and months. So yeah, I'm very, very skeptical and wary of all of this stuff. Look, I'm not a conspiracy theorist.
No.
Most of the time, frankly, it's cock up, not conspiracy.
Yes.
But it's the unintended consequences of people's stupidity and ignorance. And apparently I'm no longer allowed to use the word globalist, Richard, because if Nigel Farage or I use that word, it means we're anti-Semitic. If anybody else uses that word, apparently it's fine.
Yes. Well, we're in a strange place where words have changed. You know, the word vaccine no longer means that. Before I let you go, just want to congratulate you on your Sunday sermon last week, which was absolutely fantastic and so on the money regarding the health emergency that we have in that. Is there anything that you can add to why we think that nobody wants to talk about this problem of excess deaths?
Yeah, no, thank you. And I did work very hard on that Sunday sermon. I'd urge anybody, you can get it on social media, take a listen. The whole issue of excess deaths it's deeply, deeply troubling. Even data coming out in the last week, I'm afraid reinforces the crisis. Nobody wants to talk about it, I think, for a bunch of reasons. Firstly, the reality is no one really knows the cumulative reasons behind it, because they're not doing what I've called for and others have called for, which is a proper, independent analysis of the various causes. There'll be multiple causes. Even when you adjust for population growth and age, the reality is that there is a serious, there's hundreds of extra people are dying, at least 100 a day over and above what should be. You know, sadly, 1,650 people die every single day. That's the broad average. And the ministers should be talking about this at a weekly press conference, whether it's ambulance delays, whether it's delays getting through A&E, whether it's bed blocking at the other end, whether it's heart attacks, people dying at home, there's an excess of that, whether there's issues regarding the vaccines that no one wants to talk about. It's all got to be looked at in a rational way by an independent team. I think the truth is, though, Richard, that for too many people within the establishment, within Westminster, within Whitehall, there are so many vested interests and reputations at stake.
Yes.
And this is difficult stuff, and I have to be very careful talking about it on the media for obvious reasons. You've got all sorts of people watching. Look, I think it is really, really important. Nobody wants to talk about it. A few of us we are trying to do our bit. I'm not a conspiracy theorist, and I'm not in the Andrew Bridgen camp of saying that you've got to stop the mRNA. What I am saying is that you've just got to look at the emerging data. Let's be driven by the data and the evidence. Get some independent specialists. You may have heard the previous week I had on a very senior oncologist who he's seeing anecdotally from some of his patients. He said that he is seeing strange things, not after the first, not after the second, but after the booster, specifically on that it's because he's seeing, this is what he thinks, that it may be suppressing the immune system, which is allowing certain types of cancer to accelerate away, having previously been dormant. just after the booster. Now, it's anecdotal, it's his, but he said that other oncologists are saying the same thing. So you've got to look at this stuff, you've got to look at emerging data and say, well, okay, what is that showing us? What do we need to learn? Why has Denmark decided not to vaccinate anybody under the age of 50? These are all the questions we've just got to be brave enough to ask. It's difficult. I'm a normal layperson. I'm not a scientist. I'm not a medic.
But if you heard this,
answering.
I know you said you wouldn't necessarily stop it, but would you cease the possibility of injecting babies and children at this stage?
Oh, I've never. Yeah. I've always been against vaccinating young people, in particular children, because the data is absolutely clear. Yes. I touched on the data. That actually young people, children, they are just so not at risk from serious. The risk to them is absolutely minuscule from being seriously damaged, hospitalised, or dying from the virus. Frankly, they've probably got more chance of suffering real injury from crossing the road than from COVID. You're right. You get the point. So you've got to do a proper assessment of the benefits against the risk of potential side effects, and that's what the data shows. All the data that I've seen. If someone can tell me other data, fine, I'll look at it. But from everything I've seen, we've just got to be brave enough in this country to say, do you know what? Maybe we don't yet know all the answers. Maybe stuff's happening. Maybe we've got to look at the data. But I think the challenge at the moment is you've got a government and an establishment that's absolutely terrified as to what that data may start to show.
I think you're right. Richard, it's been an absolute joy. I hope that in the future we can talk again. And I wish you extremely well with it. You talk so much common sense, and I urge my listeners to go and check out Reform UK and look at your prospectus for 2023. There's so much information in there. And the biggest thing, I think, is hope. You're giving people hope, practical, common sense hope. So thank you so much for talking to me.
Great pleasure. Well, thank you for having me on. And we have to be optimistic. We have to be hope, and we have to talk about the good, the bad, and the difficult.